So some core rule changes and updates for 40k today. Let's talk about some special characters, some guard transports, and a bunch of objectives. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about another small rules update for Warhammer 40k. This one addressing a few burning questions and rules tweaks that are needed to make out of the War Zone Nephilim Grand Tournament pack. For the most part, this set of missions has been building on the previous ones. I guess the biggest deals with this one were some weird new rules for command point regeneration, restricting things like warlord traits and relics, so it means that you have to pay even for the first one now, a change that wasn't massively popular with really quite a lot of people. And they also rebalanced the secondary objectives and tweaked all the faction secondary ones, in theory trying to make sure that everyone was on a bit more of an even playing field, and trying to make sure that some armies didn't have too much of an advantage over the other on that front. The update today is Games Workshop's FAQ and errata type thing, the one that usually comes a few weeks after each book releases, so this one isn't going to be aimed to make any balance kind of changes at the moment. I suspect that they'll leave anything of that sort of nature into maybe a mid-season balanced data slate, as opposed to try and rush anything out too early right now. These ones are just a few rule clarifications and corrections to make sure that the game's actually playable, as there were a few things that were kind of genuinely ambiguous when they released the book. So to be honest, no huge army power changes today, though a few of these rules do affect some armies quite a bit. To be honest, I think it might not be the worst thing ever for Games Workshop not to be making major changes to the game for a little while. They did do an awful lot when Nephilim released, between the balanced data slate, points updates, and all the things in this book. In any case, let's jump through it. We've got changes to characters and warlord traits, some clarifications on which secondaries that you can pick, one important rules tweak for the guard that should help them out a fair bit, and one change for the Chaos Knights. I'd say perhaps one of the most obvious changes they needed to fix from the book when it came out was the way that this new warlord trait stratagem interacted with special characters that have multiple different warlord traits. In this latest book, you buy in a warlord trait for one command point, you don't get one free anymore, and that just made a few of the characters that have multiple warlord traits in a bit of a questionable spot. Really quite a lot of the big bad commanders of 40k get 2 or more warlord traits now, Mortarion gets 3 no less, Trajan Valoris gets 2, and Magnus and Abaddon also get multiple different traits from their book. For me, it seemed like the sensible option would just be 1 command point to unlock all of their warlord traits, but it wasn't really clear rules as written, to be honest, and I think it'd be a pretty big disincentive to take these models if, say, you had to fork out 3 extra command points for Mortarion's 3 warlord traits, when you only typically have 6 to start with in War Zone Nephilim. Basically, in the FAQ, they've confirmed that it's just 1 command point for the whole lot of traits that whichever character has. You don't have to pay for them individually, and that seems like a sensible change to me. Certainly good news if you are running Mortarion Magnus or one of those other models. Next up, they've clarified exactly which secondaries you're supposed to pick with this new War Zone Nephilim mission pack. Basically, as quite a lot of the Nephilim secondaries are different to the ones that are printed in the standard codex, I think they hadn't made it completely obvious that it was only the Nephilim ones that you can pick, and they completely supersede any ones in the codex. I guess they'd just be used for things like Eternal War missions now, if you were just playing the missions out of the standard 40k rulebook unchanged. There is also the question of the more recently released codexes, for example Codex Chaos Space Marines that came out just after War Zone Nephilim, and any of the ones in the future, say Chaos Demons for example, whether or not any future changes to secondaries would be the ones that you'd run out of their new rulebook, or whether the War Zone Nephilim ones stand firm as the only ones that you can take. Basically, for anyone who was trying to take a weird combo between the old ones and the new, they have said that you can't take any of them from your own codex in these missions, and I guess that might imply for any unreleased codexes at the moment that the Nephilim objectives would win out. I don't know if that means that when unreleased factions like Leagues of Votann come out they might have to FAQ this book again, though I'm sure that most sensible players would just use the secondaries that come out in that book and just add them onto the War Zone Nephilim missions. Next up, there's arguably a buff to the Imperial Guard, with a change to one of their better secondaries, and it does make it easier rather than harder. Out of the new set of Guard secondaries, Inflexible Command is a relatively popular pick. It's basically quite an easy one for the Astra Militarum to score, as there's not a lot of ways that the enemy can really disrupt it, unless they've got loads of snipers to kill officers and things. It does require a bit of positioning and building your army right, but basically each turn you get 2 victory points if every infantry unit in your army is less than 6 inches from an officer, a further victory point if every tank unit is near a tank commander or a vehicle officer. Chimeras also count as being officers as well if they have a platoon or company commander inside. And then, as if those two weren't enough, you also get a victory point for at least 1 unit killed by an ordered unit each turn, Not really too hard when you've got some big scary tank commanders around, and they can order themselves to reroll ones and things. Really quite an easy secondary objective to score in general, and basically they've cleared up the ambiguity that units that aren't on the battlefield don't count towards making or breaking this rule. I think rules as written it was a bit janky before. Technically it's every unit in your army that needs to be within these officer radiuses, so technically I guess anything that was in a transport or off the table wouldn't be able to be. Obviously that would be a pretty silly interpretation, and I don't think that many people were playing it that way, but quite good to have the official backing as well, just in case anyone did try and rules lawyer it the other way. Not bad news for the Guard, I guess. Despite their several layered buffs, they are one of the factions that are still struggling a bit in Nephilim. Finally, for the changes, we have the Storm of Darkness secondary changed for the Chaos Knights. Again, this is quite a small wording change to one of their secondaries. Storm of Darkness is the one where your knights stand on objectives, and you have to curse as many of them as possible for 3 victory points each. The timing on this is a little bit weird compared with quite a lot of similar objectives. For Chaos Knights it's done at the end of the morale phase, provided there's no enemy units on the same objective, and it doesn't complete until your next psychic phase. Technically, with the wording that it had previously, it's just said the end of a morale phase, so it didn't say whether or not it was yours or your opponent, so you kind of had the choice whether or not you do it at the end of yours to make sure that you could start it, even if your opponent might gun your knight down before it finishes, or you could do it at the end of your opponent's phase, presuming that they hadn't positioned models already on that objective to prevent you from being able to do it. The latter was quite strong though, as basically it just meant that your knight had to sacrifice movement to be able to do the objective, rather than having to take a turn's firepower and try and survive. In any case, if you did manage to curse the objective, then it gives you a -1 leadership to the enemies within 6 inches of it, so it's quite fun with dread abilities as yet another thing that can make enemy leadership rubbish. Now though, it's basically changed to the end of your morale phase, so that means that you only have the one option now. You have to curse the objective at the end of your turn. Your opponent will have the opportunity to try and gun down a knight, and then you're basically sacrificing your movement to curse the objective next turn. They'd still be able to shoot, say for example if you had a War Dog Executioner with the autocannons running around doing it. I guess that is a bit of a nerf really. I didn't think that the Chaos Knight secondaries would perhaps super stand out, and this one just makes it a little bit harder for them. Still though, I think the objective is still doable, particularly if you have loads of War Dogs and shooty ones. So a fairly short and sweet update there. No real groundbreaking changes to their new command point structure, and good to have a few obvious clarifications to make sure that nothing weird was happening. I look forward to hearing your take on it though. Was there anything else that they needed to address, and do the changes seem sensible enough to you? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Allspecs Tactics, or I'll certainly keep up with the regular 40k news updates. I do try and cover most of the major game changes as they happen. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Allspecs Tactics has a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can spend the time to make quite so many videos on this channel quite so often. If you are enjoying a lot, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.